Hi, my name is Lesley Lewis, and I'm here to speak about third cultured kids and cross cultural kids and adult third cultured kids. First of all, I'd really like to thank Grace and Selania from the Change School, who is putting on for the first time the summit. This is their first year, and I want to congratulate them, and I'd like to thank them so much for giving me the opportunity to be able to speak on YouTube at the first summit. I've been asked on many occasions to speak about my background and how did I get involved with third cultured kids. It's been a process. It's been a long process, actually, and it's one that has been ongoing, and I'm sure it will continue for the rest of my life. And I always tell people it was started at conception, and my mother is English, my father was American. And so I was born into a bicultural family, and believe me, that was very noticeable, whether from their communication style to the way they acted with one another, how they raised children. My brother's 16 months older than I am. He was born in England. I was born in the United States in New York. So from conception, the third cultured kid started. Another characteristic for me is that of high mobility. I was a domestic third cultured kid or cross-cultural kid. We moved often, and I counted up years ago how many schools I had attended from first grade or P1, primary one, up through high school. I had attended 7 different schools, so I know mobility. Mobility is very much a part of my life to this day. I'm always moving. I'm always saying, oh, this is exciting. Let's go here. Let's go there. So there's another characteristic. I then started working. I attended university, and I then started working when I was 21 as a teacher. I taught 4th grade, and I remained in education for many, many years in different capacities. I've taught at the primary level, the middle school level, I've taught at secondary or high school, and I've taught at university level also. So education has been very much a part of who I am, and also encountering many different cultures. When I first started teaching, I was in a large Hispanic area in California. Arizona, it was first Hispanic and what we call First Nations or Native American. I then moved to Canada, and I was working in a school where it was 70% Hong Kong, Taiwanese, and mainland students. In this process, I started to examine, and I was really looking at families that were moving in. They were immigrating. They were coming from different countries. And how were they assimilating? How were they adjusting? Were they? And I started to take notes. I started to look at my kids and work with the students that I had and how it went from there. How did they learn English? How did they learn English? Which subject matters were they good in? How was mom and dad? They would always usually have to bring translators into the school. So it has been a career that I have had with education. And after I left Vancouver, I moved to Seattle to take up another and graduated from the University of Washington with a second graduate degree. And I was working in mental health. I was working with a variety of different areas within mental health and in crisis intervention, and again, culture. In 1985, I was offered a job in Hong Kong, and that's when I moved, and I've been here ever since. So I've been in Hong Kong for 30 years, and just in the last year, I've started to split more of my time between North America and here. So I've had 30 years experience in the Asia Pacific region. Again, my work, my company is called Culture 3 Counsel, the 3 C's. Counseling, I have a private practice in Hong Kong where I'm dealing primarily with the expatriate community, and I'm also dealing with English-speaking Chinese. Secondly, the second C is coaching. I've done an extensive amount of coaching. I've been doing coaching since before the word coaching ever came in. And I've been working in multinationals with, again, cultural aspects, with individuals, small teams, and large teams within the corporate arena. The third C is culturalist. and I conduct cross-cultural work for individuals, couples, families that are moving in to different areas and speaking to them about how to conduct business in the Asia Pacific region, what is culture, looking at your own culture and self-examining that, and looking at how to live, let's say, in Hong Kong, and working with the family on the adjustments that they have to make in order to enter in. So that has been and continues to be my working career. I've always had third cultured kids in my life, and especially I would like to thank my two third cultured kids, adult third cultured kids, Gabe and Sam, my two sons. As they were growing up here in Hong Kong, they showed me, they demonstrated many of the points about being a third cultured kid. And with their friends that they brought home, the education that they received, how they perceived life, the mobility that they've had, and now that I watch them as adult third cultured kids, it even fascinates me even that much more to have had these wonderful two sons in my life. Thank you, Gabe and Sam. That's my past. I'd like to look at the present, because we're looking at past, present, future of this area, and whether I have been working in multinationals, in a multitude, whether it's huge companies that have 60, 70,000, 100,000 people globally, whether I'm working in small businesses, whether I'm working in education, whether that's in primary schools, secondary schools, universities, government departments, and government institutions, NGOs, whatever the place may be, I've always seen and have been speaking about third cultured kids, which now I'm also saying cross-cultural kids. And I'm sure you'll hear more of that from Ruth Van Rieken, who will be speaking, who in the revised edition of TCK book now brings in the cross-cultural child or kid. TCK, the word was coined 50 years ago by Ruth Useem, who was doing her research study overseas. She was looking at families that had moved internationally and looking at the children that were being brought up that way. The traditional definition of a third cultured child goes under the umbrella of cross-cultural kid, but now we're looking at adopted third cultured children. We're looking at bicultural. We're looking at multicultural. We're looking at immigrants. We're looking at borderlanders. We're looking at a variety of different children that are being brought up in many different settings to call them the cross-cultural kid. And then, of course, I'm working with many, many adult third cultured kids now that I've been fortunate enough to be in this arena for many, many decades or several decades. The questions of where is home and who am I? The relationships, what kind of relationships do you have? Whether that be with your peers, with your colleagues, with your primary partner. The education that you've received. Most third cultured kids have received university degrees, and often they've gone on to graduate degrees. The type of work that they're doing. What's the profession? Again, third cultured kids have a tendency to go into international business. They go into international education, work with NGOs, they work government institutions, diplomacy, and many, many different areas. Again, a high focus on international because they've been raised that way. This is what they know. I've worked with them in delayed adolescence. No matter what area in the traditional sense that we have examined and the characteristics of third cultured kids, these questions will always prevail. These topics, these areas will always be part of third cultured kids, cross-cultural kids, and are to this day with the adults, third cultured kids that have been raised. Who am I? That's a very sensitive question. And many people that have been brought up in the international background, I call it. It's a very sensitive subject. Where is home? Where is home? I've had people, when I've been giving talks on this topic, will actually break down and cry because they really, one, they don't know where their home is. They have a multitude of homes. They're confused. And also, people are very grateful that we're even talking about this topic because they said, that's me, that's me. You know, they're all excited and happy because finally they find a place that they say, that is who I am. You've just described me, and people come rushing up. So it's really, really, it's so rewarding to see people that have been brought up in the global arena come forth once they understand who they are. I've spoken about this over the years. I'm intrigued with how people respond. I can go into companies and talk about many different topics, one being, of course, cross-cultural, but the other one I'll bring up, do you know about third culture kids? Do you know about the adult third culture kids that are your employees, that are your colleagues? Are you aware of this amazing group of people that can bring so much into your workplace? And the majority of time, people say, no, I'm not really aware. I didn't know anything about them. Or yes, I've heard about them with the kids, but they know very, very little. And that's in companies. In educational settings, which I think has been the place or the area where most of the work has come out of as far as research, publications, articles, from the West too, started in the West. So much has come from education. But if you go into schools, how many of the schools have a continuous program throughout the year for their third culture kids, or their global nomads, or their cosmopolitans, or their global citizens, whatever the name may be? How many of the educators have been educated on being cross-cultural and what it means to work with these groups and to work with these families? Have they even looked at their own culture? And so I've seen many programs set up in education, whether they are a follow-through, how much is spoken about, what's going on at universities. There are some programs, but how much they are continuous is a question that I'm going to ask you, and that's looking at the future also. So I'm looking at how are the organizations engaging? How are they involving? How have they evolved with third cultured kids and adult third cultured kids and cross-cultural kids? What are some of the differences I'm asking also as I look to the future on this topic of what have I seen in the West? What have I seen in the East now that I've been part of the Asia Pacific for so long? I actually wrote to several of my ex-students wondering what they would have to say about their childhood and now that they're adults and working in different parts of the world in respect to how the people that they're working with today, their neighbors, their community, people they come in contact with, do they know, are they informed about who third cultured kids are or adult third cultured kids? And I'm going to read to you one of the responses I had from somebody that I had when she was 17 and 18 and is now in her 40s. She said, it's not usually known. We're not usually known third cultured kids. Sadly, I have never, not once in all my work in the United States, heard anyone refer to adult third cultured kids outside of my circle of old Hong Kong friends. I don't think Main Street United States companies pay any attention at all. Much attention is given to diversity and cultural relevance, but nothing appears to focus on or include recognition of third cultured kids or adult third cultured kids. Somebody else, and I've heard this often, nobody really cares outside of the arena of if you were a third cultured kid. I'm going to dispute that, and that's where I go into now, the future. I think people do care. Now, they may not overtly care because they are not aware, but I'm asking, like, third cultured kids in this evolution of our topic, where and what responsibility do adult third cultured kids have? What responsibility does the third cultured kid have, or the cross cultural kid? Where do you go into your community? How do you react? Basically, how are you letting people know about your amazing background and the characteristics that you have, whether you are a multilingualist, whether you're very cross-culturally astute, your mobility, your assets about being able to make people feel comfortable, your education, socially adept. I can go on and on and on with these characteristics. And how much are you? This is a question. I'd really love your input that from this conference. I think it's very important. How do third cultured and adult third cultured kids integrate in letting people know who they are? Because the world is wanting you. They are wanting everything about you, or the majority of points about you. Why do you think there's more and more attention given to third cultured kids? It's creeping in more and more. Even today in the South China Morning Post, there was a whole article on two guys here who are setting up a third cultured kid website and wanting to work with. They are adult third cultured kids and wanting to work in this area. The world is becoming, the global community is becoming very much aware of who you are. But they need to know, what makes you up? How are you getting out there? Or are we staying within ourselves, telling our narratives, telling our stories, which are very, very important? I'm not negating that at all. I think that's important to get it out. What it meant to live in all these different places. What did it mean to say hello and goodbye all the time? Where is my home? But also, how are you getting that word out to people outside the cross-cultural, third-cultured kid community, to the global citizens, to all the people around the world? I feel, in looking at this, that we have the possibility in a conference like this, the summit, we have possibilities now. How does technology come into play? How does technology come into your life? How can you relate your experiences? Again, technology is huge. And I bring this up in my, been writing a book, which is called You Couldn't Make It Up in the Decades, about adult third cultured kids. And I examine the 20-year-olds, the 30-year-olds. I've been able to interview hundreds of people up through their 80s, asking them specific questions about their experiences, their cultural dynamics, and the demographics of what made, and the important events of what has brought these people together. And one of the big questions I ask is, how has technology changed your life? So how has technology changed your life? Where does it fit? Where is it coming in? And so how much has cross-cultural grown over the years? How much has third cultured kid topic grown over the years? It's grown significantly. As I said, there's much more awareness, and the reason global nomads have been around forever. Since the beginning of human beings, we have just gone. Tribes have been nomadic. Tribes have moved around. People have been moving and moving and moving around since the beginning of time, since the beginning of human beings, anyway. Numbers. We are growing in numbers. There's hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of third cultured kids, and now adult third cultured kids. So the awareness is there. They hear the name, they hear the phrase, or they hear whatever, but how are we helping them to understand who we are? It's a good question, and I'd like some of your responses. I'd be very happy. So how is this evolving? It's evolving. How is it evolving between the West and the East? As I mentioned before, I think lots of research has come out of the West. and many books, many publications, many conferences. It started in the West in the sense of research on third cultured kids. But if you really look at Asia, which I will hone in on, you can look at other parts of the world too, please. I'm just saying that this has been an area that I've spent 30 years of, my life. It's, what are the differences that I see in the West and the East? There are some. I can't certainly, comment on all of them. But what I would say is that if one looks at Asia, people have been coming to Asia for centuries and centuries, for their businesses, for their trade, for whatever the situation may be, up until today. Now, whether they were immigrating here is a different question. So to me, the East is more of a hodgepodge. It has always locals and expatriates or global citizens, international, have always lived side by side. And people work together, they live together, international people will come and go. It just depends, they may stay. Where I believe in the West, there has been more around immigrating. Now, I know in some of the major cities that you would get the definition of what I've just said about the East, but I think there's been more focus about immigration, certainly in North America. And I feel that's true about Europe. So there's a different focus when you look at how a person is perceived in a cross-cultural context. And as a third cultured kid, are you an immigrant, or has your family moved here for maybe 3 to 5 years, maybe 7 years? It's a very different perspective. The education that you would receive would be very different. The reception would be received. Often it's about assimilating quickly into the new country. It's assimilating here into your new home, but you may have several homes as a third cultured kid and as an adult third cultured kid because, again, of that mobility. I see that happening. I also see many Western educated Asian students or young professionals and young people coming back in their 20s and early 30s that have attended university or attended schools in the West, have perhaps worked in the West for 5, 6, 7 years, whatever the length of time, and now returning to work within either corporations, within family businesses, with international education, again, a whole host of areas. And what values are they going to be bringing with their blending of the East and the West back into Asia? And I think that's starting to show some focus of the transition and the changes that are taking place in Asia. Also, I think it's very important to remember that here in Asia, that work has become more localized. It will be very important that you learn the language of the country that you're going to. I think that's important, where in other countries you learn the language of the country that you are living in. I'm not saying there isn't a change of language, but often it's the country you're in. And if you're living the international lifestyle, you may have to learn 3 or 4 different languages in order to be able to work. I think that adult third culture and third cultured kids have a very enriched cross-cultural experience and background, and that can really assist them wherever they go in the world, but certainly here in the East, where, again, networking is important, or the person looks at your job and says, oh, yes, okay, that would be a good fit. Yeah, we like what we see. So I see that, and again, I hone in on the East and the West. So those are just a few. I see some of the schools that are changing here in the East, taking on more of a focus of what it means to have children from all over the world, more and more and more. It's huge. It's just become huge, and I see that also taking place in the West as communities become more cross-cultural, as more kids are coming in from all over, and adults, that I see cross-cultural communities really just evolving, which is so exciting, and the work that comes around that. So, in my experience, I'm looking to the future of wanting people to understand the third cultured kid. You're an amazing group of people. You have so much to offer the world. This is a beautiful mosaic. The mosaic of all these pieces coming together to fit into what makes up our global community. You have so many points that people want. They want to embrace. Allow them to come in. Allow them to know you. Tell them who you are more and more. And as I say, as the global citizens, what do I value? I value your morals. I value your values. I think you are the global citizens, the adult third cultured kids, the third cultured kids, the global nomads, whatever name, and that's the last question. Some people like TCK, the name. Other people find it, maybe that doesn't fit. It would be an interesting discussion to have about what do we call ourselves? Are we global citizens? Are we global nomads? Whoever you are, and whatever name you decide to call yourself, you've led a most fascinating life. So help to create the change with your strong values, your morals, your social good, and within the global community, create the mosaic of interdependency, human kindness, to be a global citizen in this global community. Continue to cross your global boundaries. You are an amazing group of people, and thank you so much for this opportunity to speak to you.